Hello, and welcome to Meet Your Alderman, a podcast that aims to inform Chicago residents about the people that represent them. I'm Sarah Scott, newcomer to Chicago, who's been here for 8 months and only just tried deep dish pizza last week.
And I'm Eric Eber, lifelong Chicagoan who loves how alive the city feels in the summer.
We spoke with Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez of the 25th Ward, which includes the diverse communities of Pilsen, Chinatown, Little Italy, West Loop, South Loop, McKinley Park, and Heart of Chicago. Eric and I are in consensus that this funky-shaped ward has the best food in the city.
Alderman Sigcho-Lopez is currently serving his first term as alderman, and what a busy term it's been. In addition to the usual aldermanic responsibilities, he's been coordinating community meetings and surveys to get a temperature check on the 78. We're going to go into more depth midway through the interview about what the 78 is, but all you need to know right now is that it's a huge mega development project coming to the south branch of the Chicago River. The trade-offs of economic development v. housing displacement have been debated for the last 3 years, and this whole topic has been a major source of contention between Alderman Sigcho-Lopez and Mayor Lightfoot.
You'll notice that the alderman is incredibly passionate about his ward and takes a lot of pride in his position on city council. He talks about his involvement in the community before he became alderman, and it's clear that he's made great relationships that inspire folks to turn out to community meetings. Additionally, with an academic background in economics and education, it's safe to say that the alderman is extremely thoughtful and comprehensive in his approach to cost-benefit analysis when considering development options.
We'd also like to note that Alderman Sigcho-Lopez was listening in on a city council meeting about a new casino in Chicago during our interview. We've worked hard to decrease the background noise, but you will definitely hear some muffled talking. So just think of it as a real-life look and example of just how busy these representatives really are.
2 important and super recent updates. For reference, this episode was recorded on April 25th. Earlier this month, Mayor Lightfoot finally chose a spot for a casino in the city. It will be along the Chicago River in River West, where an old Chicago Tribune printing plant now stands. The plan still requires city council approval, which is a tall order considering that many aldermen are still hesitant about the deal. But if approved, the $1.7 billion casino could be completed by 2026 and generate up to $200 million in annual revenue for the city.
And lastly, there's an update on the ward maps. So our super fans will recognize the ward map issue as a recurring theme throughout many of our episodes, as it's been a contentious and undecided issue since we aired our first episode back in the winter. Well, as of today, May 16th, City Council approved the new ward maps, staving off a voter referendum. The Latino caucus came away with one less ward than it had originally desired, but there will now be an Asian majority ward, which is something that we covered in this interview. As Alderman Sigcho-Lopez predicted, Chinatown will be absorbed into the 11th ward and led by Nicole Lee, the first Chinese-American alderwoman in city history. So we're going to include links in the show notes about these 2 big recent developments. But for now, let's get on to the interview.
Alderman Sigcho-Lopez, we're thrilled to have you on. To start, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background. I know you're originally from Ecuador, so tell us a little bit about your journey to Chicago.
I migrated, as you mentioned, from Ecuador. My involvement in city government, in my own experience, something that I was not planning or intended. It seems, to me, there was a trajectory as an immigrant in Chicago. I worked, previous to being alderman, in the UIC Center for Literacy. I worked as an adult educator in the UIC Center for Literacy at UIC, doing the Spanish literacy mainly.
Alderman, am I correct? Did you found that?
I was one of the co-founders. Yes, I was one of the founders of the Spanish literacy program, where we went into the communities that we serve. We went to the classrooms that are in the Southwest, West Side. I spent a lot of time in classrooms in low-income communities in the city of Chicago, understanding the issues of literacy, but also in general, the systemic issues that we have in the city. I volunteer with the Pilsen Alliance, and as I was a volunteer soccer coach in one of the programs in our local schools, in Pilsen Academy, one of the schools that were slated to close. So that's how I became involved. And involvement at the grassroots level, I was member of the grassroots education movement that was fighting this effort to stop the school closures. That success in keeping the 2 schools in our community open, Youngman Elementary and Pilsen Academy, was really what motivated me as I learned the effectiveness of organizing our parents or community to ultimately run in 2015 against former and now disgraced Alderman Solis. I was short 70 votes of the runoff, but we continued to organize. I ultimately became alderman in 2019, and we have continued focusing on the same very issues of housing as a human right, quality public education for the communities and the city that we all need and deserve.
Yeah, you touched on so many good things, so many of the topics that we want to cover just in that one answer. But before we get into that, just to go back to your beginning, you came here as an immigrant by yourself as a teenager. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how was that coming alone at such a young age to a brand new country? It sounds like kind of you used education like that was your main way in, that you kind of made your inroads in education and have kind of stuck with that, or it's become a huge part of your identity. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that's accurate. I think throughout my journey here, I always feel fortunate that I had good mentors, a host family who helped me even stay for 2 years with them. Was able to go to college through a soccer and academic scholarship. So I feel very fortunate in many regards, but I understood also that there were many others who were not lucky as I feel I was. As elder person, I've seen the needs of our communities who are fighting, struggling day in, day out just to make ends meet. But those are communities who make the city of Chicago the special and welcoming sanctuary city that we all see and value. I always feel welcome. I always feel accepted. In an immigrant community has been the port of entry for many, not only Chinatown, Pilsen, Little Village. And that's the kind of city that we are fighting for. When we see the struggles across the country, I think that these are also examples of resiliency that are important to highlight.
Of course. And that really brings us to our next question, which is, what has your experience been overseeing, a number of different neighborhoods who do have diverse populations?
When we bring people together and we are operating in full transparency and creative processes, when we can hear each other, when we can listen to each other, when we can empower each other. We've seen how people from the West Loop, South Loop, Chinatown, Pilsen, UIC, McKinley Park, Abla Homes, Barbara Jean Wright, all of them coming together to help in our efforts to have fairness, justice, and equity in our decisions. So we have, for instance, a zoning advisory board made of residents from across the board to make sure that we make decisions that are in the best interest of the public as a community instead of special interest groups as was in the past. When we actually bring our communities together, when we started talking about mayoral prerogative or aldermanic prerogative, we talk about community prerogative. We see that we actually can get into a lot of common ground that unfortunately very rarely gets covered or even communicated to others. But for instance, in the next 5 years, we have a good plan to reach 1,000 units of affordable housing. We recently acquired 18th and Peoria, which was almost set to allow the developer to put 500 luxury units in 18th and Peoria. Now we're going to move towards making that an 100% affordable housing site. So when we look at what is possible, we got to make sure that we discuss with the community, that we plan with the community. Now we're seeing, communities like Chinatown. The only Chinatown that is growing because of the hard work of those small businesses, because of the hard work of people who work in and day out to make the Chinatown that special community that is. But we also have to see that when we don't follow those community-driven processes, when we don't listen to our constituents, we also see the cost of corruption. But what we rarely are seeing is how critical is the role of the community when we inform them, when we give them options. And time after time, we see the wisdom of our residents across the world who oftentimes side with what's best for the community and not what's best for developers or casino operators, you name it.
Right. And so you did a really good job mentioning how the community across the ward, which is very diverse, can come together and be united in some things. I'm curious, are there any things, I'll use Pilsen and Chinatown mainly as examples because those are probably the two most famous neighborhoods in your ward, but are there examples, but differences between Pilsen and Chinatown that require you to look at things differently?
Well, certainly, there's definitely different approaches, right? And there's different histories, right? I think the Chinatown community, for instance, when it comes to economic development, is very mindful not to allow big developers to come in and erode the social fabric. Something that is very similar to the Pilsen community. I think in Pilsen, we have issues, for instance, of public safety that need to be thought in a different scope, right? We have issues of violence, how the violence that we see in our communities in terms of Chinatown, is more external. in terms of Pilsen, we have to look at what's happening internally on our community. But what I tell you that is similar is that people across the world are trying to think creatively and understanding that what happens in one community affects the other one, instead of thinking that we're operating in silos. The learning from one another, I think, is something that is great to see. We have monthly calls now on the 25th Ward stakeholders who bring everybody to the table to find that collaboration and finding the answers that we need.
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent example. You obviously know that Alderwoman Lee was recently appointed, and we were just wondering if you have any plans for future collaboration across wards, either with her or with other aldermen.
Well, certainly having the first Asian majority ward was something that I committed when I campaigned to be elected alderman of the 25th ward. We were mindful of the importance of this commitment to the Chinatown community. Many members in city council can agree on, and the consensus is to make sure that we make that a priority. I see that in both maps that may go into referendum. The Asian majority ward is a reality. So I almost think that it's almost imminent that we will see the first Asian majority ward in the history of the city of Chicago. I think that is something to be proud of. I was not only supportive of it, but I joined the efforts in the community, and the credit to the community leaders who fought and have fought for decades to make this happen. So, of course, I look forward to working together with Alderwoman Lee on the 11th ward. And I look forward to working with the Chinatown leaders and the community moving forward. I remain vigilant of this effort. I'm right now, in fact, still listening in on the first hearing for the casino committee that the mayor set up. And I'm planning to continue to voice the concerns of our 25th residents, especially from the Chinatown community, who's also concerned about small businesses losing revenue to the casino businesses. And that is a very valid concern.
You mentioned, that's the 11th ward that Alderwoman Lee just took over. Is that the ward that will take over Chinatown in these new ward maps?
Yes, because I represent mainly some of the commercial side of Chinatown, right? The Wentworth Avenue, Chinatown Square. And of course, there's a significant population of residents and seniors in particular. So I want to make sure that the work that we've done in collaboration with the community leaders, I want to make sure that those efforts continue to represent the best interests of the Chinatown community. But indeed, it is the 11th ward where these three precincts that I currently represent, probably in the next election, they will go to the 11th ward.
Do you have any updates on the ward map? Is it going to a referendum, or is City Council planning on coming to consensus on that?
There has not been consensus. Again, there's still time to reach maybe an agreement. We're not there yet. If there's no agreement, there will be certainly a referendum with two questions, with two different maps, one with the Latino caucus, which is called the People's Coalition map, and the other one, which is the Rules Committee, the Bloc Caucus, which is the Chicago United map. So those are the two alternatives. If there's no agreement, there will be a referendum on June 28th, where the voters will be able to decide.
And how likely do you think that this ward map issue is going to go to a referendum, if you had to guess?
If I have to guess, just given where the conversations are right now, I think that would probably be the likeliest scenario, unless we're able to get to 41 votes. It seems like right now with the Latino caucus opposition, it does seem that it'll be difficult to reach those 41 votes. But again, I think that the conversations still remain, and if there's an agreement that can get us to fair representation to both the Bloc Caucus as well as the Latino caucus.
So we want to move on to something that clearly you're very passionate about. That is D78, the planned development. For clarification, is the 78 going to be in your ward? So
depending on the map, Chicago United map has it on the 3rd ward in the next remap, and in the Latino caucus, in the People's Coalition map, that the 78 remains in the 25th. Okay, so now this conversation's headed toward the 78, which you can probably already tell us something that Alderman Sigcho-Lopez has thought a lot about. Here's a little background on it. The 78 is a $7 billion mixed-use mega-development project currently underway in the South Branch of the Chicago River. It's located between the South Loop and Chinatown neighborhoods. This project is expected to be built in the next decade and will occupy about 62 acres of land previously used as a railroad yard. The name for the project comes from the fact that there are currently 77 recognized